Welcome to Business Basics, lesson number 12. You're fired. I have to admit, when I was planning this course, I was in two minds as to whether or not to include this lesson. Surely nobody wants to learn how to get fired in English. But then, as one of my EES members very rightly pointed out, many of you guys are managers in companies where you speak English, and you may well one day need to actually fire someone else. So this lesson really is designed, hopefully, for you not to be on the receiving end of it, but perhaps for you to be on the doing end of it. Although, of course, I hope that you never have to fire somebody in English, or indeed any other language, any more than you have to get fired in English. Though, of course, if you are going to be fired in English, you might as well be prepared to do it elegantly, if nothing else. Simon came straight to the point. If you come straight to the point, you go straight to the heart of the matter. There's no warm-up, no chit-chat, no small talk, no pleasantries, nothing. You just get straight into the meat of the conversation. The point, of course, means the reason for having that conversation. So if you go straight to the point, you go straight to the reason for having that conversation. I'm sorry, Andy, he said, but at the end of your 3-month probation, we'll be letting you go. I'm afraid that the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable. We felt that you weren't a part of the team, and we can't see a future for you in this company. So first and foremost, just notice how formal the language use is here. You know, Andy's getting fired. This is not the kind of situation that calls for fun, casual, playful language. On the contrary, this is the kind of situation where you want to be very, very formal with the language that you use. And this is very much reflected in the length of the sentences as well. A feature of formal language is that the sentences get longer and longer and longer. The more formal it is, the more words you tend to use. I'm sorry, Andy. This is quite an important little chunk here in this stretch of speech. Because when Simon says this, what he's basically doing is indicating right from the very beginning that this is bad news, Andy. The second Andy hears, I'm sorry, Andy, he knows that bad news is coming. This will almost always be followed by but as well, as is the case here. I'm sorry, Andy, but at the end of your 3-month probation. I'm sorry, Andy, he said, but at the end of your 3-month probation, we'll be letting you go. At the end of your 3-month probation, we'll be letting you go. If you let someone go, well, you fire them. You're basically telling them that they don't have a job anymore. This is quite polite, quite formal language usage. We never really say you're fired. You know, you hear this on TV and places like that in films and things where, you know, the manager gets really, really angry and says, you're fired! Get out of my sight! But, you know, unless it's that kind of a heated situation like that, in reality, that doesn't happen. In reality, we don't say you're fired. We say, I'm afraid we will be letting you go at the end of such and such a period. Again, very formal language used here. Of course, 3-month probation means the initial 3-month trial period. So Andy has just started at City Busy 3 months before, or almost 3 months before. That is his trial period, his 3-month probation. And this is the period where City Busy monitors him and sees, right, is this a person we really want to keep here long term? And in this case, no, obviously not, because he's been off sick way too much. So they've decided to let him go. I'm afraid that the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable, says Simon. This is very, very formal language use. Basically, what Simon is saying here is just, you took too much time off. But in this very formal situation, it would be inappropriate to say it like that. So he says, I'm afraid that the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable. I'm afraid tagged onto the beginning of this just makes it that little bit more polite, that little bit more formal. It's much better to say, I'm afraid that the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable than it would be to just say the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable. That would be quite blunt, a little bit sudden. I'm afraid also makes it very clear that this is the reason why they are letting Andy go. So Simon has started by saying, I'm sorry, indicating that this is bad news, but at the end of your 3-month probation, we'll be letting you go, telling him that we are letting you go. The reason why is because the amount of sick leave that you had was unacceptable. And that meaning of the reason why is because is contained in I'm afraid. We felt that you weren't a part of the team and we can't see a future for you in this company. Again, very, very formal language use. Simon here is being very careful to express this in a way that isn't directly criticizing Andy, but at the same time is making his feelings clear. What Simon means by this is, Andy, you obviously don't care enough about this job. You're bloody lazy, Andy. You've been here for a couple of weeks and look how many days sick you've had. You're obviously not taking this job seriously. But that would be a direct criticism of Andy, and we don't really want to do that in this kind of formal situation. So what we do is we kind of talk around it. We felt that you weren't a part of the team. We know that this means, though, that Andy, you're bloody lazy. Buck your ideas up. We felt that you weren't a part of the team and we can't see a future for you in this company. So again, very, very formal language use. Simon isn't saying anything directly. He's not directly criticizing Andy, but what he is doing with this is just making it very, very clear that Andy, you're fired. We don't want you here anymore. We don't want you in this company. Just, he doesn't say it quite like that because that would be too blunt for this situation. He needs to be quite formal and quite careful in the way that he words it. And there we go. Now you know how to fire somebody in English. I hope that you will never actually need to use this, but if you ever do need to fire a member of your team, I recommend that you just use this as a template, just change the details and deliver it as is. Of course, do change the details. Don't say, I'm sorry, Andy, if their name is actually James or something like that. And, if the reason is not because of their sick leave, don't say it's because of your sick leave. Do change the details, but use this template as a guide to do the letting go of the member of staff. As always, do go through this. Just make sure that you've understood all the language that we've discussed, what it means, and importantly, why it is used here in this context. The main thing that you want to pay attention to here is the very formal, very indirect language usage. Simon doesn't directly criticize Andy for much of this, but he does indirectly criticize him. Of course, he gives him a reason. He tells him the reason why is because you took too much sick leave. But of course, there's a lot of meaning and a lot of nuance contained in that. He never actually says, we think you're lazy and we don't think it seems like you can't be bothered to do your job. But that's kind of what Simon means. Again, just pay very close attention to the formality of the language that is being used. And with that, my friends, we have reached the end of Business Basics. I hope you've enjoyed your time throughout these 12 lessons as much as I have enjoyed making them. I hope you have learned a lot about the fundamentals of business English and using English in, well, business situations. Do go back through these lessons regularly, review often, and just make sure that you really get all this language embedded firmly in your brain. If you feel ready for more of a challenge, I recommend you check out the EES program, Julian Northbrook's League of Extraordinary English Speakers, where every week we publish a new lesson. Very similar in style to these business basic lessons, but they are for more advanced users of English. The lessons are longer and considerably more challenging, but similar in style. To check that out, just head over to doingenglish.com/membership. Do shoot me an email telling me what you thought about this course, and I will see you around. Goodbye. Want to get more advanced, bigger, better, more detailed, more comprehensive business English lessons just like this one? Head over to doingenglish.com/membership and join us in Julian Northbrook's League of Extraordinary English Speakers.